Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just back again with a video. I'm just going to cover kind of a few topics, kind of random, but talk a little bit about 1 Corinthians 13, and its definition of love, and, relate that to Christ, and then also talk about science and link these kind of concepts. And then just do a little follow-up, I guess, on, my debate with Fight the Flat Earth and Professor Bell, and then the after show and stuff. So, I wouldn't really call the first one a debate with Professor Bell. He was just kind of talking about random stuff. And, it's just, I'm kind of surprised he went down that road. But, he talked about models and how they're baked in with speculation and then certain facts and axioms and all that kind of stuff. So just like a mishmash of different things, which I didn't think served the ball earth stance very well. But he decided to go down that road for some reason. That's absolutely not what a model is for. A model is to have certain foundational points, and to use a financial example, because I've done those more recently, financial models are typically rooted in actuals, and so like historical numbers, and so KPIs, key performance indicators and all that. And then, you may need to do some interpolations within that if you need to like spread costs and all that, or most commonly used to look to the future are called, extrapolations. And so you use historical real events. Those are not in question. Those are actually what happened. And then you try and make inferences and, develop, financial models to, steer the company towards the future and all that kind of stuff. And so they're not rooted in speculation. There may be a few, but that doesn't add to the strength of the model, is to have tons of, numbers that are just pure speculation. And so the less and less speculation, the more and more, things that are actuals, and so in the ball earth, it would be like real observations and stuff. And so he's basically saying like, the earth is 93 million miles away from the sun. That's one actual, that's one axiom that we're not, replacing. And then objects cannot be obstructed bottom up across a flat surface. So that's their axiom for optics, their foundational element. And so, once you mix all those things in together, which, are just not true, then, everything else that it predicts obviously is false. And so, that's crazy that a professor would take that stance. And I'm going to link that to real science. I'm going to talk about fundamental tenets of actual science, for people who know this, and then kind of tie it into like, spiritual things. But, that first debate was kind of strange, in my opinion. And then the second one, I would say, was a little bit better, was, Fight the Flat Earth, Rumpus, Bob the Science Guy, some other guy named Tony, I think, in geophysics and stuff. So that was a little bit better. They started, they're talking about a gravimeter when, in industry that I'm familiar with, that's actually called an accelerometer and has nothing to do with gravity. It's just a mass that's, influencing some kind of, piezoelectric crystal, and then it, exerts some kind of pressure on that, and then it outputs some kind of electrical signal. And that's used in directional drilling, to like understand the orientation of the bit and then, get it to go in the right direction. So that type of thing, coupled with, similar things like as just like a level to understand, in 3D where the actual head is of the drill bit, that's necessary, for a person to steer the bit, and that kind of thing. So it's not using gravity or mass attracting mass or anything like that. That's nonsense. And so, that's interesting that they would bring that up as a strength for the ball earth. And so they were just like grasping at straws, like they were just struggling to bring up actual real life examples. And then this is kind of related to like this sort of lesson, is that they're like hand waving away errors. They're like, yeah, whatever. If you're doing a seismic survey, it's like 10 miles by 10 miles, 10,000 feet deep. You don't really need to worry about the errors, whether it's flat or curved or not. And I'm like, really? And so I want people to know that these people are out of their mind. And so this is what I'll talk about real science, is that real science do care, of course, because real science can lead to real products and technology that, that people use in real life, and people's lives could be at stake, and all that kind of stuff, especially in oil and gas, where you're drilling. And if you miss, a certain pocket, that could be, have financial ramifications, because you may not get to your target, in a fast enough time or at all. And then, you could hit something that could put other people in danger, and that kind of thing. And so, it's not just negligible. Everything can't be negligible. The movement of the earth apparently is negligible, which is absurd. And so we kind of get what's going on, like that these people are just, not scientists, obviously, and, pushing lies. And then all they can do at that point is start quizzing us and on Wikipedia, which, for the record, I'm answering questions of stuff that I took like over 16 years ago. And so I'm even shocked that I remembered some of those things. And so, that's crazy. And even the industry stuff that I was talking about, it took me a little, a minute to kind of remember some of those things too, because that was my first job outside of grad school. And so that was starting in 2007. And so that's still a little bit, a while ago. So if I was asked stuff about like the stuff I've done in the last couple of years, like financial models and all that kind of stuff, I understand being less forgiving about that kind of thing. But, that stuff, obviously, they're literally not allowed to talk about, like the economy and financial stuff. And so they'll go nowhere near that. And so, because once a person does, we know that this whole system is bound to collapse because they're just, printing money and giving it out to random people. And so, not random people, but a small group of people, corporations. And so they won't even go there, that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting, where we're at now. Obviously it doesn't really benefit people to really go on those. I would say for me personally, partially because it's just, I'm bored, but I want people to know that I know now through the Bible that there's a higher truth about flat earth, is that the Bible teaches that this is hell. Jesus says this right from his mouth, that do not fear, anybody here on earth, fear the Most High, who can destroy both body and soul in hell. So God can literally make people not exist, their body and their soul. And he's planning to do that to his left-hand side. And so Christ is telling us to fear that entity. And so hell has to be a place where both body and soul can be destroyed, and that has to be here. And then also in Revelation, it talks about death and hell are cast into the lake of fire. And so hell is a physical thing, and it's here, it's this realm. And so these hangouts prove that for me. And so when I go on these hangouts, and they start, quizzing you and then, making fun of you and like, all that, saying basically stupid things, I'm like, this is for me a faith builder, because I'm like, this just showing me more and more hell. I would be weirded out if I saw more and more heaven of anything constructive, productive, collaborative. I'll be like, damn, well, what's the Bible talking about? Like there's people here who actually seem to be, living by these right principles that I'll read actually in 1 Corinthians 13. And so I don't see that. And so again, it's a strange thing that my brain has been flipped, but this is just the way it is, and I'm comfortable with this reality. And so I really want more of that. And, earlier today I was, blocked from Jose's, channel, which obviously I don't care, but because of a comment that somebody else made on my comment board that, I didn't make it, but I just want people to know that's good news for me, because it's like, if I'm getting more and more people, wanting to hear me speak and then all that kind of stuff, it's very likely and possibly absolutely true that I'm diluting my message, or just diluting the Bible, in general. And so I don't want that. I want a tapering, a narrowing of the people that are interested in hearing my opinions, and so for people out there who are starting new channels and all that, you shouldn't want your channel to grow. That's crazy if that's an objective that you have in the days that we live in. I had this viral video that I copied and pasted somebody else's snippet, and then it got like 60,000 views. And then so that's more views than I've had for my entire channel for the last few years in one video that's like a minute long. And so maybe 200 new people, 300 new people came by, and it's only a matter of time until they see the stuff that I post, if I keep going for the next month or so, that they're not going to stay, like they will be like, this person's out of their mind, even if they are Christian and religious and stuff, they're not. I've already gotten some negative response to the flat earth, videos, because I linked that to that one, a good suggestion, to do that. And so that's just one of them, and then all the other things. So I expect, and I almost want now my channel to shrink, it wouldn't make sense if my channel kept growing and all that kind of stuff beyond what it was before, like 600 or 700 or something. So it's like it's an insult for me. It's not necessarily an insult, but I'm self-conscious of the fact that if my channel grows, then it's likely that I'm not saying what's actually true. And so there are a lot of things that will get your channel to shrink. Be a flat earther, proclaim the Bible as, first and foremost, just teach the Bible. Second, state that the earth is flat and stationary. Talk about Christ's skin color, the way that he looks, that he's dark skin. That'll lose you a lot of subs really quick from religious people, obviously, Christians, Christians. Talk about Mystery Babylon being America. We'll get you to lose a lot of subs really quick. And talk about how God hates homosexuality, and all that kind of stuff. And you can add more and more, and then there's just going to be less and less people. And so for those people out there who, God is looking for people who, and Jesus says this, that he's bringing the division, and so he's looking for people who will give up everything, and so if anybody, including myself, is attached to one thing, a person, a group, anything, even our own life, we're not worthy. It doesn't mean that we're not on God's right hand side, but we can't be part of God's select group. And so I just want people to know, if they're into that, and not many people are, we have to give up everything. We can't look for a pat on the back from any of these people, because the majority of these people are Satanists, like Jeranism and all these like flat earth high priests and all that. God hates these people. He's using them and giving them a limited script. We know he's using them because he's giving them a limited script. God doesn't give me a limited script. I can go and freely teach the Bible or not. I can go and do whatever I want, in this like micro level. I'm not talking about infinite free will to like go to the ice wall or anything like that, but I don't have a limited script. And so we know, it doesn't mean God loves me, but we know that God doesn't like those people, or a better way to use it is he's using them to carry out a very specific narrative. And that's all they're allowed to speak about, and so they can't talk about, other things, certain things about the Bible and appreciate it. And certainly not things that point us to the end times, and that type of stuff. And so, wanting attention or approval from those kind of people, to me, is essentially just a sign that that person does not love the God of the Bible, because Jesus tells us in many places and in many ways that we have to give up everything, and so we shouldn't want a pat on the back. I definitely don't want a pat on the back from these ballers, because they're not intelligent, but, or religious people as well. And so, just be very, very aware of that those are the kind of people that Christ is reuniting in the times that we live in now, because this groupthink and all that stuff is not from God. So this is another quick point I want to make, is that people might wonder, why aren't there a group or one person even on earth who's like healing, like raising people from the dead, because that's happened in human history, even apart from Christ doing that, and like, just doing miracles and like prophesying and all that kind of stuff, who are like living, walking the walk and all that kind of stuff. How come we don't see that? Well, to understand, we're living in the final age of deception. So if that were the case, that there were a person or a group of people doing that, how could the world get deceived then? Because they could go to them and get, the truth, literally the God's honest truth. And so God has done this. God has removed himself. And then the Bible says in Job that he's given the earth into the hands of the wicked. And so everything that God used to do, like our insurance, Geico and all that, God would be, the insurance in the past. Our health is now the satanic medical system. God used to be the healer. Our education system, God used to educate. And all that, list all the things, all the political structures and all that, God would set those things up. And so now it's by his left-hand side. And so God has been removed, and he's outsourced everything to his left-hand side, including interpreting and teaching the Bible. And so I put myself in this too. Like, we are just in a very confusing place, and that's what the term Babylon literally means. When people say, oh, he's just babbling and all that, that comes from that term. And so it's just confusion. And I want people to know that's by design. And so we have to like undo this confusion, with God's help through flat earth and other truths. But that's why that there's no like one person, who's like teaching the truth and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like just a maze, and we have to like sort of navigate through it, but we have to do it alone. It's not going to be like some massive group. I don't want people to think that in these days, like the flat earth is not going to take over the world. Truth is not going to overcome the world until Christ returns himself, and so that's the only hope that we have, of undoing this. And so I'm not saying to not go and share and do things, but don't expect us as individuals to like blow up, and like the God and the truth to come out. The truth, the real truth and real truthers are very, very few people. They're individuals, and they're going to be a very, very peculiar group, because they're going to be really tormented, because we're living in an evil age, but they're going to be very isolated. It's again, it's not going to be big channels and, getting co-signed from all these other flat earth people and all that kind of stuff. These people are evil. And so, and just at a very basic level, or at a sort of intellectual level, they're not intelligent. And so, that's should not be an objective for me or for anybody else. I want my channel to slough down, after it's been increased in the last little while. I want people to see the things that I share and to resist it, or to like not be attracted to it. And then, that kind of thing. And so that to me is a sign that what I'm teaching is actually true. And so I want people to understand that. So I want to talk about 1 Corinthians 13 and, it's the definition of love, according to Paul writing to the Corinthians. So 1 Corinthians 13 reads, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoings, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away." And so this is an amazing thing. This to me is essentially Paul describing Christ, because Christ did not know all things. He did not know everything the Most High knows. He did not know the timing of his own return, but he's still God, and so this is an incredible thing, that those things can end, but love will never end. So there's a supreme ethic that sits on top of all those things, and that's God, and so that's what is getting at here, is that we can do all these things. We can, God's left and right hand side are involved in these things, that are written here. Some of them prophesy correctly or falsely, but some of them give charity, and all that kind of stuff. Some of them, share knowledge and that kind of thing, but there's something above that, and for us as people who are into the Bible, we know what that is. That's the Most High who has brought Christ on earth to give us an example of actual love. And it sits above all these other, quote, earthly things that, like Paul's writing here, will pass away. And so that's an incredible thing. So when Christ does what he does and says the things that he says, we know that that's love. Even if he doesn't fall into those buckets or axioms that other people claim is needed for that person or entity to be God. And so, that's an incredible thing. We have that insight to know that the way he is what is written here in 1 Corinthians 13, the fulfillment of it. And so that's an amazing thing, and that gives us confidence that he's from God, and from the Most High. And so that's not for everybody to be aware of that, because they'll nitpick about certain things, little things here and there. Oh, he didn't call himself God. He says he's the Son of Man. He didn't know the timing of his own return, so he can't be God, and all that kind of stuff. But we're told here in 1 Corinthians 13 what the actual definition of love is that if any action does not have God in it, then, which is love, then it's not truly pure. It is just an earthly sort of action that these things will stop, at some point. And so this is an amazing thing. This is what it says here: love will never end. And so if anything that doesn't end has to be eternal, and that's God, and so God has to preserve it. God has to want that thing to continue. And then, so if that is the case, then those things have to then be like him, and so that's what we are petitioning through Christ, is to be changed, into the way Christ is. And how that happens, I obviously don't know, but that's what a few of us want, and so that will allow us to never end, and then we can, like it says here, live forever, and so that's an amazing thing. And so that's one of the very, very incredible aspects of the Bible, is that our definition of love is very, very different than the world's, because people think that there's a lot of loving acts going on. Like, even I was watching this past weekend a charity event where they're giving like 20 million to charity. People would say that's a charitable thing, that's a cool loving act. But the reality is that, first of all, $20 million won't help anybody, and so it's nothing compared to like what those people who are involved in that event actually have. And they're lying, they're misleading the world, thinking that the government cares about, people with this corona thing. And so that's actually an evil act. So that's an extreme example of God's left-hand side. But it just goes to show that we are being measured and evaluated by our intentions, and like why we're doing things and all that kind of stuff. So I can prophesy till my face turns blue. I could go on these debates and win every single thing and know every single answer that they could ever give to me, and all that kind of stuff. But the Bible says here, all those things are temporary. And so if we do not align ourselves with the way Christ is, which is love embodied in human form, then we will end. Then there will be an end to that. And so that's what the Bible says, that God's left-hand side will literally be terminated. And it's very clear to me that some of these people know that, that we go up against in these debates, even on the flat earth side, they know that, and so there's another group, I would say, relatively small group, that we don't want to end. We don't want to discontinue and to have just been an actor in God's movie. We want to continue to be loved by him, and also, more importantly, possibly to learn how to love the way he does. And so that's what 1 Corinthians 13 says. So Paul gives us the underpinnings of love. We see the perfect example, representation of it in human form in Jesus Christ. And so I want people to understand, to relate that to science. Real science is humble and highly statistical, and it cares for people. And so, what do I mean by that? Humility. Science has to be humble because it should never be presented to us in a way to gain leverage or power or authority over another person. So real people who are conducting real science from God, I'm talking about, not in this earthly capitalistic world that we live in, it has to be humble. And so one of the cool things that we know science has to be humble because of its very principles, and this is the one aspect that I actually agree with the ballers, is that science can technically never prove anything absolutely. And so an example of that is that let's say you're doing an experiment. You have an independent variable which you believe is like isolated, and then you're wiggling it to do something to a dependent variable. And so the independent term is very, very important, because even just in our own life, independent means that we're on our own. There's no influences on us and all that kind of stuff. We can be, we're operating on our own, and so isolated. And so that's a very, very important thing in science. But the thing about science that they keep reminding us, and it's true, what they're saying, is that science is humble, because we may not have isolated that variable, even if we think that we have perfectly. And just to use this is a bit tongue in cheek, but just to illustrate an extreme example. If you're turning a knob, right, and you're doing an experiment and you're turning that knob and you're like, whoa, like I turn it this way, something happens, I turn it back, something else happens, and you keep doing it, and you're like, okay, it's consistent. It keeps doing the same thing. When I go one way or the other, you're like, and then you come back the next day and you're like, yeah, same thing. And then somebody else does the same thing with the same device, different part of the world or whatever. And you're like, yeah, same thing. And so people are like, looks like we have cause and effect here. Looks like when we do this happens and all that. But, and again, I'm only saying this for like illustrative purposes. You can never say for certain that turning of the knob is creating that output, because what if it's just hand contact or pressure on the knob? What if it's not even just the turning of the knob? What if it's just the pressure that was used to turn the knob did that? Just that is like the one in never really instance, but you don't know for sure. And so that's the aspect that a person has to always leave open, if they're a real scientist and humble, for the next person to investigate down the road. They never close the door to that and say, no, I've absolutely come up with a relationship here and it's never going to change. You always have to leave open the possibility from a technical perspective that independent variable was not actually independent. And I used a silly example just to illustrate the point, but independence cannot be guaranteed 100%. So that's why science is humble, because it's highly statistical. And so, of course, if you do that, thousands of experiments, everybody, reaffirms it over time and different tests and all that experiments, then it's like you've established virtually certainly cause and effect. And then what you can do when you establish cause and effect, you can set up equations. And then once you have equations, you can set up proportions. And so, once you turn that knob, you can get relationships between, an independent and dependent variable. And then you've created a foundation of equations that other people can go and use and to do real things, in real life, in industry. And so what we've seen is this gravity, this fictitious force, is not used anywhere. And so they have gravity in a few equations, but no one's actually using it when you go into the real life. And so this is why I know that, God is behind this, obviously. And so, that's not real science. I'm talking about like actual science, like people doing like real experiments, establishing cause and effect, generating equations, which are relationships that have proportionality, and then to go and build things, that affect people's lives. And so that's the last part that I want people to appreciate, is that science cares for people. And so science cares. It's not just like, oh, every error is negligible. It doesn't make a difference on a 10 by 10 mile survey, 10,000 feet deep. The errors, whatever, flatter curve, no big deal. Really? No math person or science person talks like that. That's absolute nonsense. And if they do, they explain exactly why that it doesn't matter. And so it's very, very important, especially in oil and gas, because people are drilling, like there's a bit going into the earth. And so, people's lives are at stake. It's not just like everything down there is like oil and gas. You just kind of figure out, just drill wherever, and stuff, magical oil and gas pocket, just hit it every time or whatever. That's not the way it works. If that were the case, you wouldn't have to spend a lot of money doing these expensive surveys. And so that's insane. And so science cares, because there are people that are, their lives potentially are at stake, and their vocation, their livelihood is to go and, do those kind of things, and make a living. And so people's lives are at stake. And then obviously, like, pilots is another sort of extreme example, that the pilots that I've talked to in my personal life, not these like agents like Wolfie and stuff, like real pilots, like they assume flat and stationary, and that's because it is flat and stationary. And so they don't it's not negligible. You don't figure it out, in the air, like, oh, like didn't need to teach you that in your training program, because, it's not important really. And so that's insane. So I want people to know in situations like that too. And one of the people that I talk to is in defense. So like people's lives are at stake again. So real science cares, people actually care. And so that's why when you talk to like normal people, like in your life, and you say like the earth isn't moving, they don't really want to talk about it anymore, because they know that it's insane. And then, when you bring up these examples, they definitely don't want to talk about it. If they don't, if they're not excited by that truth, that the earth is flat and stationary, and that, which means God exists and all that. So science is humble, highly statistical, and it cares for people. And so those are the fundamental principles. And we don't see any of that, in the ball earth. We see them saying that it's doesn't prove things, but then they keep telling us this is proof of the globe. And so it's definitely not humble from what they tell us, because they don't teach us anything. And they're very confident in things that are obviously lies. And then they don't care for anybody. And so we know that they don't care for anybody because they don't talk about other things that actually affect people's lives. And so they're limited scripters, very limited. Them, and then you have people who have a bit more in their script, like a lot of the flat earthers. And then, there's people like me who are infinite scripters, in the sense that we don't have any limit, to talk to. Even people like Pete Shea, who claim to call out other agents, there are certain things that I know if I were to talk to Pete Shea, he won't be able to talk about, And so I don't say this to brag, but there's not very, very many people out there who don't have a limited script. There's a lot of Christians who are embarrassed by Christ being dark skinned, and that's not in their script. And so they're either playing a role, or God's going to tell them that fact the hard way, And so I would just recommend for people who are not stupid to don't go down that road. Like, who cares if we get co-signed by the people on this earth? They're completely brain dead. And a lot of people won't say that America is Mystery Babylon when that's obvious. And so that's actually more obvious to me than the earth being flat and stationary. And so the earth being flat and stationary is a big, hurdle that a person can jump over. But once that's true, because that has to be true for the Bible to be true, once the Bible's true, America being Mystery Babylon is obvious. And so give me that the earth is flat and stationary, and then I can prove to somebody in 5 seconds, 5 minutes, that America's Mystery Babylon. And it's just obvious from like hundreds of different angles. And so there are people who won't go there, and so I just want people, don't be limited by these people. These people, especially the people that are delivering all these lies to us and some truths, they're not like, we don't report to them, especially if you're a person who's deep into the Bible. We know now that God is using them to deliver information to us, down to the individual level, boots on the ground, everyday average people. And so we don't have to fawn over them and pretend like they, owe us, we owe them something, or they even owe us anything. They're just doing what God has programmed them to do. And so God has not programmed us to be limited scripters and not care about people and all that kind of stuff. we are supposed to uplift real science, which, like I said, is humble, highly statistical, and cares for people, and real love, which is not about just simply giving to the poor, or because the poor will not exist in the kingdom. And so it is not just knowing all things, because knowledge and truth and all that will be in abundance. There will be no limit to it and all that kind of stuff. And so there'll be no end to it. And so that's all these things are either going to be terminated or going to be expanded to infinity. And so, we don't have to get involved in the economy of defining love the way this world does, because the majority of it is evil. And also, we don't have to define science the way that we're told here, because it's evil as well. So I hope everyone's doing well. Bye.